Joseph, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Greg.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you. To get started, why don't you quickly just tell us about your practice and what you specialize in?
Sure. So for me, I focus in on financial planning. I've been in the industry for about 26 years, which is terrifying to say. But and when I left college, I wanted to be a financial planner, and I landed in the wrong spot at the outset. So I get my job coming out of college in June. I'm doing all the tests and all that kind of stuff. And then in my first month of actually doing the job, I realized I wasn't with the right firm. And in making my shift, I ended up in a position where I faced advisors for about 15 years. So I helped them with practice management and a whole bunch of things so that they could run their own business. And then in 2016, my daughter was 2, and we were about to have a son. And my next sort of institutional gig was going to keep me on the road 40 weeks out of the year. And I actually like my family, and so I said, you know what? Let me pivot back to working with individuals
Mhm.
and make what I felt was going to be a greater impact. When they tell you about working on the institutional side, and let's say I work with 20 advisors, and each advisor works with hundreds of clients, they say you're impacting thousands of people,
Mhm.
but you don't quite feel that way. And
Mhm.
so as I came back in 2016 to work with individuals, I got that ability to uh, make a larger impact and feel more tied in with my clients. And so that's been fantastic. And it's been a journey, as I think it is for all of us.
Right.
And I've gotten to the point where about 18 months ago, I started my own practice. And so it's been a wild ride, but it's been a lot of fun.
18 months ago. Wow, congratulations. So it
Thanks.
sounds like what inspired you to do this was you wanted to feel more individual impact more people as individuals.
Correct. Yeah, I think that, and I think this is the case for a lot of us, just as humans. We want to sit here and believe that the time we're spending on this earth is going to be beneficial, and that we are going to do positive things, and that we are going to help people. And so this very much feeds into that for me. I mean, it's one of a number of areas where I focus on trying to help others, but this is the one that sustains my family.
I love it. I love it. So how many clients do you have now?
So for me, I have, let's call it about somewhere between 2 to 3 dozen.
Nice.
And you might sit there and be like, oh, that's pretty small. I'm like, yeah, well, it's a year and a half in. Um, but the flip side to it is I'm not looking to build a massive business, and that may sound odd. But in my time doing this, what I've come to realize is that I would really like to build my practice so that I can really be integrated in and have great relationships with, I'm going to say, the 70 or so clients that I want to have, and I can go deep with them and build long-term relationships. And and so that means that I'm not looking to necessarily become this. I'll go practice business enterprise.
Yeah.
And what's funny is if we had had this conversation 20 years ago, I would have been, as a mid 20 something, I would have been like, I'm going to be a world beater. I'm going to build the biggest advisory business in the world. And,
Yeah.
it's going to go 100 million to a billion to 5 billion. And then,
Yeah.
it's going to become that enterprise. Um, that's not what I'm looking to do. So time has given me a different perspective on that.
Yeah. Well, it's probably not just time, but also taking the action and having the experiences that you've had and realizing what you get fulfillment and enjoy doing. And sometimes when we start building our businesses, we think it means go big, but then you realize that you enjoy doing different things. You want to have more impact. And if you go big, you as an individual might have less impact on the individuals that you work with. So that's what's cool about having your own business, and you get to choose how you approach these things. So I love that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, getting back to what I was saying, toward the beginning of our conversation, I'm looking to do that individual impact. And at some point, when you move from a practice to a business, I'm gonna call that the level. Um, once you're at the business, you're not necessarily getting that day-to-day individual impact with the folks that you're partnering with, because at some point you have to run the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay. So let's talk maybe a little bit more about the people that you serve. So maybe you could take a second to describe the type of person who comes to you. What's a typical situation that they might need you to lead them through?
yeah, so for me, I'm based out right outside of Washington D.C. in Great Falls, Virginia. So I end up with sort of three different types of people that are coming to me. I end up with a lot of government employees. Go figure, it being here in Washington D.C. I also end up with a bunch of folks that tend to be mid-career, and they are looking to move beyond just investing. So they've been doing their own thing for, in some cases a couple decades, and now they have some real money, and they're like, oh gosh, I need to switch from just investing to figuring out how this is going to translate, how these assets are going to translate into reaching my goals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then ultimately, I end up with people that are looking for long-term financial partnership. So they're not the do-it-yourself type people. Um, they want someone to be able to partner with and collaborate with, and ask all sorts of questions, even if the amount of times I hear, I'm sorry, this is gonna be a dumb question. I'm like, nope, nope, that's the entire purpose of this, because I want you to feel like you can ask anything and everything,
Yeah.
because this is an important part of your life. So those are sort of the three types of people that I end up running up against,
Mm-hmm.
saying that they're, that are a good fit for me. And a lot of what ends up being the catalyst for them is, I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear this, change. So it's a job change or a life change that occurs, and as that happens, they are reevaluating. Um, it's getting to that point where they are all of a sudden concerned to find out if they're okay, right? They're like,
Right.
"Am I doing okay?"
Yeah.
Um, and in many cases they're just feeling lost or unsure about the process and the activities they've been doing, and how that's supposed to translate into the goals that they want to achieve.
So you mentioned that you say there's no dumb questions, right? So what are some of the questions that maybe your clients or prospective clients will typically ask when they meet with you for the first time?
Well, I would say in a first time conversation, the questions revolve around wanting to get to know me, wanting to get to know about my process, wanting to maybe more broadly ask questions about how to choose an advisor, sort of what matters, and what I do versus what other people might do in the industry. Um, Along those lines, I sit here and I introduce myself as a financial planner, and it's because I lead with planning. And it's not to say that there are other models out there. There are people that lead with investing, and that's fine. There are people that lead with insurance, and that's fine. I sort of call it religion, right? Just because someone has this different perspective on it doesn't mean that it's bad. It
Right.
just may mean that it's not the right fit for you.
Right.
And so I sit there and say, hey, I lead with planning, and this is my process. I take them through the process and give them a better understanding of the fact that basically everything starts with and ends with their goals,
Mm.
and that our process is going to revolve around focusing on those goals and figuring out how to make sure that people are achieving those goals.
Yeah, I love that that's where you start. We'll talk more about your process here in a little bit.
Sure.
Um, just so that people listening can maybe self-identify if they're the type of person who is a good fit for you. Are there any like specific demographics that your ideal clients might typically fall into? So think like age range, income, net worth. Are there any tangible numbers for when it starts to make sense to work with you? Is there anything specific that stands out?
Um, 6'2", brunette,
Yeah,
good head of hair. I know
yeah,
I'm sorry.
shiny,
I, it's
yeah,
it's
shiny
important for
hair. Yeah,
people to know this is how I am, and if this is not, uh, you know, a fit for you. I can appreciate that. Sometimes for my wife, there are days where it's not a fit for her, and she just has to grin and bear it. Um, no, I said earlier, I think it's interesting because as a financial planner, I'm a firm believer that everyone needs a financial planner slash advisor, right? And I understand that's self-serving, but I'd say I'd feel that way even if I weren't in the industry, because there are lots of decisions, and these are big decisions that are being made. The funny thing about it is that in our industry, there's this weird dichotomy because for a lot of people in my seat, we're going to sit here saying, oh, we want people that are pre-retirement and that have large amounts of assets and that kind of stuff. And yes, that's nice, and I'm happy to take on those people as well. But the flip side to that coin is that the amount of impact that I can make on a like mid 20 something
Hmm.
is it is possibly more foundational because they're making decisions that are going to impact the next, you know 30 years as they're like building and formulating, and it creates their foundation. So
Right. Yeah.
that's why I say I end up with, and I think the sweet spot for me is a lot of mid-career because they're making a good salary. They're making enough money that when they take their income and then they have their expenses, there's excess cash flow that they can then vector towards their goals,
Right.
right? And now they're just trying to figure out, how do I accomplish that?
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. You said that everyone needs an FP, financial planner, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I agree. I've shared this story on the podcast before, but my when my old man passed away a couple years ago,
Mm,
my mom had to figure out all that financial stuff on her own because my dad was the one who was in charge of it, and that was tough. She made the transition because she's just a great she's great, she figured it out, but it was tough. But having
yeah.
somebody there to help you kind of work through that is an important thing. One other thing that I wanted to fall back on related to what you said was mid-career. Let's talk a little bit more about what financial planning looks like when you're mid-career, because in most cases you're not at the distribution phase, right? You're not at retirement, you're not collecting income, you're still accumulating, you're still putting money away. So
Yeah.
what does that look like when you're mid-career? Is it like for a flat fee? You create a financial plan for a flat fee? Help us understand more about what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's a fair question. Ultimately, um, well, I guess I'll ask back. I'm going to kick it back to you for a second. When you say you create a plan for a flat fee, why do you say it that way?
Well, typically, I found when I work with my clients who are financial planners, when they are targeting the certain demographic, them, a lot of people, when they're at that stage of life in their financial journey, they might look at themselves in a way that makes them feel like I'm not ready for a full time financial planner yet. And so they're searching out people who offer flat fee planning. It might start as a thing that they're exploring, that they're curious about. So I'm not saying that this is the case for you, but this is just a pattern that I've noticed where a lot of people who are in that mid stage life, they're looking for flat fee planning mostly, and not are aware, don't think that they're ready yet for uh, what comes after that. So I'm just curious about your experience and kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'll say is I don't do flat fee planning, so that we'll start with that, right?
Nice,
Um,
nice,
I
awesome.
it's a situation because part of that is it flat fee planning tends to be somewhat transactional,
Hmm.
right? And that's, as I said earlier, I'm looking to build long-term financial partnerships, right? I want to be the person that you're calling for sort of everything financial, even if you think it doesn't have anything to do with our financial planning conversations. Uh, Good random example of that is I have a client who needs to get his roof replaced on his house, and as he was looking at the payment options, was like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about it." I'm like, "Yep, I want to talk to you about that." And that may be something that a lot of people are like, "Oh, I wouldn't think I would talk to my financial advisor about that." But no, I want to talk about it because it's going to impact your cash flow. It's going to impact your savings. It's going to impact a whole bunch of things, right?
Right.
Um, so I'm in wanting to build these long-term relationships. It's a scenario where I'm not looking for transactional. Now I hear what you're saying. I understand. I wouldn't limit that. mentality to mid-career. I would say that there are plenty of people that say, I just have a couple of questions. I need someone to talk to. I want a plan put together,
Hmm.
um, but I don't want an ongoing relationship. And I'd say there are there are parts of our industry that have historically tried to do that. And my perspective on it, again, over the 26 years that I've been in the industry, is the challenge is that a lot of the times the person in my seat, my job, isn't necessarily just to tell you what the right thing is to do. It's to be the nudge to make you do it,
Mm.
right?
Accountability, guidance, and accountability. Yeah.
Correct. So I almost and I'll play with a scenario that's comes up frequently in our industry, my segment of the industry as well, like estate planning. So people will sit there and like, oh, I've got to do estate planning, and they'll contact a family law attorney or an estate attorney, and they'll put the estate plan together, and they'll have the binder, and they spent their money on the binder that lays everything out,
Yeah.
and then they don't execute on what's needed to put the assets into the estate.
Mm.
And so what they've done is they've done what they think is the work necessary, but they haven't actually completed the job. And so that's why when it comes to financial planning, I sit here saying, hey, part of my job is to be the nudge to keep people on top of things, to be open at all times for these questions so that no one's sitting there going, oh, I have a question, but I don't want to ask, and I don't have a person, or I don't want to pay a fee, like a one-off fee. I just want you to be able to talk to me whenever you have these thoughts.
Yeah. Like a
And
retainer kind of thing.
well, yeah, I mean, it puts you in a position where the way I work is assets under management,
Hmm.
and so it's just a scenario where, and trust me, I again, being in the industry as long as I have, I'm not saying it's the perfect system, but it's it's set up in a way that it incentivizes the right activities.
Absolutely. Here's what I like about what you're saying is something that stands out to me about our interview and what you're sharing with me so far, and your philosophy and your approach is long-term relationships, intimate relationships where you get to know the individual and it's an ongoing thing are very important to you. So it's a long-term thing. And the benefit of how you approach this is you're not waiting until people are 60 to start the relationship. You're looking to do that before, even before then. So and one of the reasons why, so you're looking for the types of relationships that aren't just transactional. There are people who are looking for a long-term thing, and that fits perfectly with what you've learned about yourself and how you've and why you've started your business and what inspired you to do it in the first place. So
Correct.
I love that you're building your whole practice around that. I think that's perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
actually, I'll get back to something when you were talking about your father and his passing, and your mom sort of having to take over, right? And probably I mean, there are probably a number of sea changes that happened there, but at
Right.
least on the financial side, there's probably a big one. So that's something where when you talk to me about people I work with, again, government, I'd say mid-career, and I would say I work with people further along further along in life experience, but a lot of it tends to be people who, and I'm sort of loath to say this, whether it be divorced or widowers.
Mm.
So then they're sitting here now, having previously had someone else take care of it, or at least having someone else to partner with about it and talk to about it. And now all of a sudden it's all on them.
Mm.
So when I think of a number of my clients that are, more experienced in life, it tends to be folks that are now solo, and they're like, I want that partnership. I want someone who I can call. I want someone I can have these conversations with.
Yeah, someone they can trust who deeply cares and understands. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, I love that. All right, let's talk a little bit more about um, kind of what it's like to work with you and how your clients typically find you. So, where do you typically find your clients, and what are some of the ways that you get to know them as individuals?
Sure. So, I mean, what I'll say is, at this stage in my business, to be honest, I need to do a better job of finding prospective clients and or giving folks that are looking for a financial planner a better opportunity to know that I'm out there, right? Um, what's strange about it is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not looking to build this monstrosity of a business, and so I've sort of taken it, I've sort of slow walked it because I'm like I don't want let's say to do dinner seminars and like do this
Yeah.
repetitive dinner seminar thing where I bring in 20 people, I feed them a meal, I get 5 names, I sign one client and rinse and repeat and just keep doing that. Um, Instead, I'm trying to build it more organically with people I know referring me, either current clients or people in my circle and that kind of thing. But I am at this stage thinking I do need to probably be a little bit more systematic than that. One area in which I have introductions is through a government program where government employees who are asking to speak with a financial planner can reach out. So that's a little bit more of a systematic area in which people reach me. But generally, it's people being introduced to me because of someone they know saying, "Hey, you're looking for a financial planner. You should have a conversation with Joe."
So they're referrals.
Yeah.
I love that. It definitely makes things easier if somebody that they trust says, "Hey, you want to talk to Joe? He's the guy." So I love that. It also speaks to more of your intentional approach and not wanting to go big, but be very intentional with who you work with those 70 perfect fits.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so let's talk more about. This is how I always start this question: is you know it's so
Why am I
it's
nervous all of a sudden? You preface the question
you
with an
might
ex.
you might I told you before we start, if there's any questions you want to pass on, just let me know. But it's easier for, I think, people in general to be self-critical or think about the things that we wish we could do better on or want to do better on, and it's more challenging, and maybe it's just for me, maybe not for you, but it's more challenging. You have to be intentional about acknowledging the things that you do well and that you work hard at. So maybe you could put your humble hat on for a second and think about something that you do that takes a lot of time or energy for your clients, that you do for them, that they might not see or know about. Does anything stand out to you?
Um, there are a couple things that pop to mind. One is one tends to be a lot of sort of in the background operational stuff, right? There's unfortunately a lot of our industry that is not sexy. Um, I don't think anyone thinks. I don't think anyone would categorize financial services as a sexy industry, right? I don't. Maybe venture capital and private equity. Yeah, who knows? I can always find an exception.
I don't know. I
But
mean, I think being there for people when they need it is that's pretty cool.
no, it is, and that's I love it, and that's why I'm passionate about it. But anyway, I guess where I'm going with it is to say that there is a lot of blocking and tackling in the background. There are a lot of like ticky tacky things that need to be done, and as we are one of the most highly regulated industries as well, it's just what people think should be very easy to do and make sense and be very straightforward. And I might agree that I think it should be easy and straightforward. There are times where it's not. And so you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And I try and do a lot as much as possible to limit the number of hoops that the people I work with have to jump through for those types of things. So that's one thing. The other I'd say is portfolio construction. I don't do a lot of. Uh, it's not like I do go deep in portfolio because again I'm not leading with investments,
Right.
but especially when it comes to how taxes can impact portfolio changes, I do spend a good amount of time there. So you sit there and it's like, oh, a client of mine recently is like, oh, I need some cash out of my accounts. What is the best way to do it? There was a good amount of time spent on, well, how are we going to fit this and make it so that I can get the money that they need and do it in a manner that limits the tax exposure and still maintains the investment exposure they want.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as simple as clicking a button.
Yeah.
It does take a little bit more time than that. And even in this day of technology, with good tools, and as we talk about AI, I feel like everyone wants to talk about AI now. There's still a lot of things to have, to benefit having an actual person who understands and
Sure,
is
of course.
is going to move beyond just the calculation portion of the process.
Yeah, so you put a lot of time, energy, and effort into a lot of administrative things that benefit your clients that needs to be done that they will never see or know about, but they experience the benefits from.
Correct.
I love it. I love it. All right, before we talk about what it's the process of working with you, I want to ask one question. Um, you know, since you've started your practice, you've been on this journey for a year and a half. You said,
Yeah, we're,
congrats,
we're closing in on 2 years. July will be 2 years.
congrats, and you've got 2 to 3 dozen clients. Congrats again.
Yep.
Um, are there any programs, trainings, or organizations that have shaped your approach and maybe positively impacted how you serve your clients? Is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh, well, I guess one thing is I am a certified financial planner professional, and
Nice.
that's a process. It's an educational process and a testing process and an experience process and all those sorts of things. And so, especially as someone that leads with planning, that's a important certification for me to have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what's interesting for me is I look at that from the planning perspective. I also have a different certification. It's the SEMA, Chartered Investment Management Analyst, and that's part of the Institute of Wealth Investments (IWI). And again, it's just sort of balancing the scales, the planning side and the investing side. But I'd say a lot of it, a lot of so I'm very thankful to those organizations and thankful to the education that I went through in order to get those certifications. Um, but then a lot of it is I can look back on my history, especially that segment of time where I was facing advisors and helping them with their practices, and I learned by watching.
Mm.
So I had a decade and a half where I got to just sit there and watch people and see how they built and see uh, how they handled clients and do all the things that were necessary. And um, and so that's informing me today about how I want to build my practice and do what's best for my clients. And then even after that, as the couple of steps that I took to get from that institutional side of the business to working with individuals, each step along the way, I learned a little bit more, added another piece, and it's informed me to bring the person that's in front of you today, and
Yeah.
the focus and the mentality I have when it comes to working with my clients.
Yeah. So learning through observation and mentorship. I love it. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about what it's like to work with you. So let's say somebody were to sign up to be a client with you today. Maybe
Sure.
you could walk us through your process. So when somebody becomes a client today, what happens the first maybe 4 to 8 weeks? And then what does it kind of look like to work with you over the course of a calendar year?
Yeah, sure. So we call this 1-800 number, and we do what's called an account. No, I'm joking. Sorry. I, so again, I'm sitting here talking about planning, right? And in the first conversation, before you say I want to work with Joe, I tell you about the 6 areas of financial planning that I focus on: spending, savings, investing, tax planning, risk management, which is a fancy word for insurance, and then estate planning, right? And I define those areas and explain what's happening in those areas. And then what ends up coming out of that initial discussion is an understanding of where you might need help and how those things, again, as I said at one point, everything starts with and ends with your goals. So how those things inform and are informed by those goals. And so when you say, you know what, Joe, that all sounds great. I understand your process and the areas of financial planning, and I understand you're telling me these are the areas I probably need to work on. And it may be that we have a conversation around budgeting, not so much because I need to know how many times you're going to Starbucks, but to understand at the end of the month how much extra cash there's left to point towards your goals,
Right.
right? And then we sit there and we'll talk about how to fund those goals. And then we may find that you need to have a conversation about estate planning because you haven't done that yet and you just had your second child. And along those same lines, you haven't done any life insurance outside of the stuff that you have through your work, which is not planning life insurance, because if you lose your job, that sort of goes away. So you need to get a policy that's in place that's yours. So then we sit there and we find the holes, and then we just sort of stack them out and say, okay, well, these are the areas in which we're going to focus, and this is how we're going to attack it. And for the first 3 to 6 months, we have frequent conversations, working towards those goals, working towards getting you onto a good path, so that you understand where your money is, where it's going, and how it's going to fulfill those goals. And then in some cases, taking care of some blocking and tackling, like, oh, you need a 20-year term insurance policy. Yeah, let's get that knocked out.
Yeah.
We need to get you in touch with a estate planning attorney, because at a minimum you need durable power of attorney and your medical directive. So let's get that knocked out. And so that's that. The beginning of the relationship is front loaded, and then from there, the ongoing relationship, it's really dependent on the client. I have some folks that I have one person I'm thinking of right now, and she wants to meet monthly. And by meet, the conversation can be as quick as 5 minutes sometimes, and other times it stretches out to an hour, and that's perfectly fine.
So anything that's on her mind, basically, she wants to kind of you be a sounding board for.
Yeah, we use it as a touch base, as a scheduled touch base, primarily around the fact that we want to make sure she has the right income that she needs to run her household. So
Mm-hmm.
if there need to be adjustments, that's sort of the plan, or the why we have that in place. But sometimes that conversation will balloon out from just oh yeah, no, I'm good, don't need any additional funds, to, hey, I want to talk to you about, should I make a contribution to my Roth? We need to do that by April 15th, right? Which is today. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, tax day. It's great. So sometimes that conversation will balloon out, and it just gives us the ability. Again, I want to meet people where they're at, and so for her, she wants to talk every month, and that's great. I have other people, probably more regularly. We try and meet quarterly, and what that ends up being is meeting maybe 3-ish times a year,
Mm.
right? And then I have other people that they're fine meeting once or twice a year, and
I like it.
I'm I'm not here to dictate to them. I'm here as their resource, not necessarily to be their drill instructor. Outside of what I said earlier about, part of my job at times is just to be a nudge. But
Yeah. No, I love it. I love how you spent a lot of time in the beginning getting to know them. You said front loading a lot of things. And then as you continue to work together, it's kind of up to them. But you make recommendations, nudge them along. In the beginning, you get to learn more about them and what their goals and dreams are. And then you meet regularly to help them line those things up and nudge them forward. I love it. That accountability makes all the difference. So, all right. So we're right at about time. But for somebody listening who's like, interested in learning more about you, maybe interested in learning what it might look like to work with you. For somebody who wants to get in touch, what should they do next? Where should they go?
sure. So we're in an interesting spot, because we're currently going through a website redesign. So normally I'd say just go to qmadvisors.com, and you can get to know a little bit more about me. But at this point, the best thing to probably do, it's a combination of things. One is you could go to my LinkedIn and get to know a little bit more about me and my background that way. And then the other thing is, really just have the conversation. It doesn't have to be a long conversation, but I book people out typically using my Calendly.
Mm-hmm.
So, calendly.com/Joe Yoon QM, and so people book out time to either do a Zoom, or have a phone call, or meet face to face, whatever works, as long as they're in the DC area. As much as I'd love to have a face to face introductory meeting in Maui, that may be it's the
It's a
dream, but
long flight.
we're maybe not quite there yet. But yeah, I think having that conversation, because ultimately it gives people the opportunity to get to know me off the page, and to ask the questions that they want to ask. So I do a lot of, I end up having a lot of people that just book some time using my Calendly, and just jump on and want to have that initial conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Joseph, to share your journey with us. Appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on.
Hey, before we go, I'd say one last thing is, whether it be, and unfortunately maybe it is a differentiator of mine, um, but I focus on the idea that I'm here to be a coach, and I'm here to provide guidance and education, and in some cases answers. But I want to put a caveat there, because there there are times in life where there might be the right financial answer, but that doesn't mean it's the right actual answer,
Right.
right? And so with a lot of my clients, part of what they enjoy about our relationship is that I'll sit there and they'll bring up a topic, and they'll say, "Hey, I want to do." I'm thinking of a client right now. She had just paid off her car, and she wanted to turn around and say, "Okay, I want to buy a new car now."
Mm.
And in
Ah,
this in this car environment and all this kind of stuff, we're like, well, just so you know, financially, that's not the right answer. The right answer is, you've just paid off this car. It's still pretty new. You can still ride it out for a number of years, and you don't have to make a payment and all that other stuff. Um, but for her, she'd always had this dream of a different car than the one that she was currently driving. And it's like, okay, well, with that in mind, just because it's not the right financial answer doesn't mean that it's not the right answer for you, because ultimately, through good financial planning, again, getting back to it being about goals, unless the goal is just completely insane, um, it that's what we should be focused on. And so I only bring that up because I have had a number of folks that I work with say, "Oh, this is really great," because I feel like, in other conversations I've had, I don't get the differentiation between this is the right financial answer versus this is potentially still, even if it's not the best financial decision, it is the right
right,
decision for that person.
right. And your focus on long-term relationships and really getting to know people gives you the conviction and the intuition to make those recommendations. And you have the relationship, so people feel comfortable probably with that. So I love that.
Exactly.
All right, Joseph, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much, Greg.